How many people are attending this, Hariman?
76 presently, but several more on YouTube and stuff. Hey guys, everybody, welcome back to our second and final session of the day, consumer fintech and the impact of account aggregators. We're super excited for this one. For our two guests today, we have Kunal Shah, who is the founder of CRED, previously founder of Freecharge, and we also have Sumit Gwalani, who is a co-founder of Epifi, and before that, co-founder of Google Pays, which now is known as Google Pay, the popular UPI payment app. So before we dive into the questions and get started, I'd like to just again just do some housekeeping. So there's a bunch of emoji options at the bottom, so please spam those emojis if you like what our speakers are saying. Also, there's a questions tab on the right, so please enter your questions there and keep the questions focused about the topic. I know you guys must be very curious about these businesses and several other things, but we'll try to keep things focused on account aggregation and the sort of new infrastructure coming up and how that will affect consumer fintech. Also, lastly, Salil Ravindran's talk, which we just heard right now, we'll have the slides for you from that talk, and we'll also try to answer some of the unanswered questions. So, with that said, thank you so much, Kunal and Sumit, for being here. I'd like to start the question to you, Kunal. Almost a year ago, on 25th July 2019, was the consumer launch of Sehmati. That's when the name Sehmati came out. There's a big event and stuff to launch it. You were there, and you tweeted at the event that this will be as big as UPI. Could you tell us why you felt so, and do you still feel that way?
I still feel that way for the core concept that is being addressed over here, right? So my view is that we are all entering a time where data is going to be democratized in a very interesting way, and the consumer is going to have a lot of control on how they want to kind of move with that. In the past, the amount of inefficiencies that existed and the amount of gaps that existed in terms of just getting things done seamlessly through technology was so high that now it's only on somebody's imagination what they can build on top of this, right? And I think as long as the consumer protection is taken care of, consent is taken care of, and all the parties involved in this particular journey do their role well, this should open up credit. This should open up many things in terms of managing money, personal finance. A lot of opportunities open on top of that. Having said that, historically, my worry has been that global companies understand these platforms better. Indian founders and Indian fintechs are usually slow to address this. And my biggest worry is that when something like this happens, it should not again become only a few players kind of controlling this particular ecosystem versus it kind of becoming truly democratic and creating some value for the India fintechs per se.
Okay, very interesting. You spoke about consumer protection and then also about value capture by these big global corporates and tech companies. And maybe we can, Sumit, turn it over to you as somebody who's heading Google Pay. You were involved with the creation of new public infrastructure in the form of UPI from the early days. So what kind of parallels do you see there, and what should we kind of expect here? And do you have anything to say to Kunal's point?
No, it's a great point, right? Like, I think there are a ton of us who were building this way back in 2015, 16. And I don't think any one of us would have imagined that there will be like 1.3 billion transactions that take place on UPI every month. The numbers that we saw in June. It's sort of a dream in that sense sometimes, right? From where we were. I think there are a ton of parallels, right? Like, if you look, there was a hackathon back for UPI. The hackathon was scheduled for April 2016, right before the then Governor Rajan, officially launched UPI. We are in that same hackathon phase right now, 4 years later. And there's no reason why, as Kunal mentioned, account aggregator can, unlock a ton of new products that actually revolutionize fintech to almost what I would say as the next wave of fintech in India. The same things out there, right? Like, you're seeing some of the same things. You've got a platform and infrastructure that actually can be built upon. You have got participating players. Previously was only an RBI participation when it was UPI. This time you've got like 3 other regulators involved in that sense, right? And the ability to open up data in a full-fledged consent manner, where the user is giving permission to whom they want it, and then, very easy to revoke the consent that an account aggregator allows, will allow innovation to happen in a big way. The point that Kunal made is very true, right? Like, you could have big multinationals take this on, with both arms and try and go for this. But I think there are a bunch of things in place, right? As account aggregator starts today, for you to become a financial information, an FIU, you actually need to be a regulated entity to start with, which is very different from what an UPI was. So there are like some restrictions in place already compared to what was there during UPI in that sense. While this might get opened up in the future, today those restrictions do exist in that sense. And there's a great opportunity for everyone who's either regulated by SEBI, RBI, or others to build innovative solutions on top of others, right? I think Salil's talked about a bunch of different areas where it can happen, right? Everything from PFMs and neobanks to credit, robo advisors, wealth management, and so on, right? And the amount of opportunities, as I look at, there are probably like 100 different areas and 100 different startup ideas that you could actually build once AI is in full flow.
Interesting. And I'd like to go back to Kunal to ask, why is it that you think that Indian founders and companies haven't managed to seize, in your opinion, seize these opportunities as well as their foreign counterparts may have? Is it a access to capital thing? Is it a mindset thing? What would you like to see from Indian entrepreneurs, at least in this opportunity? You're muted, by the way.
Sorry, I was trying to reduce the noise that was coming earlier. I am trying to think that the reason we do this is because our platform understanding is just weak. I don't think we understand how platforms are built. We are still on the V0 mindset of how products are. We are still graduating to understanding how products are built, right? And the world has evolved to how platforms are built. And I think that fundamental difference is allowing all these large platforms to convert opportunities into APIs and kind of become bigger, right? So I would say that platforms are by design better consumers of APIs versus products, right? And naturally they are like black holes which suck every API. So if for some reason, let's say insurance becomes a good API, again, I believe the platforms will win because it will just become easy for them to do this business. And I think sometimes I believe inefficiencies in the market allow the smaller products to exist. When something becomes super standardized, platforms naturally have an unfair advantage because they naturally have distribution, understanding of how to approach some of these APIs and convert them to their advantage. And I think it sort of becomes this a loop. And I mean, look at the situation, right? Like we have account aggregator. How many fintechs are attending sessions about it? How many have actually read a note about this? How many have considered applying for it? And you will have every global company, which is not even in India, probably inquiring about this and figuring out how to participate in this ecosystem. So I think that, to me, remains the biggest worry, that the way we think may take much longer than the opportunity may exist. So that's the way I think about it.
Yeah, I'm encouraged by the fact that in the hackathon context, at least, we receive many applications from fintechs. So many, of the leading fintechs and even small fintechs in the country have teams that reached out to participate and sort of learn about the hackathon. So hopefully we see some cool presentations from them next weekend. And just to talk to your point, there's an interesting concept within iSpirit, which many of you might know, which is the idea of the athletic Gavaskar. And it's a concept which our co-founder Sharad likes to talk about a lot, which is that it's not good enough anymore to just be a great cricketer. You need to also be a great athlete. It means you can't just be great at thinking about product and ops and stuff. You need to also think strategically. You also think about infrastructure and platform. And with the account aggregator, with UPI and other components of India Stack, we hope that we're helping to build that infrastructure that's needed. But of course, it requires engagement from the private sector to learn about it, innovate on top of it. Sumit, you were involved with a ton of innovations on top of UPI. Could you speak a little bit about that and how entrepreneurs and developers can kind of engage with this infra and what they should expect?
Yeah, no, Yeah, I can talk quickly about UPI, right? Like again, very like in the early days of UPI, when UPI launched, even after not the soft launch but the hard launch back in August 2006, there was 2016. There were only 21 banks on it, right? And there were questions asked, will other banks drop out or stuff, right? But it was important, to think long term, to be persistent, and continue to build for the future. Don't build for the present, build for the future. Build what the users would want, and they would love a product in that sense, right? Like, and that's really becomes the key, right? Like thinking about what the users would want and where you could be different than the rest. It's always great to build incremental solutions which are slightly better, but can you build in any product you launch at least one or two new things that you have not seen before? They may not be that it doesn't happen, but you're seeing it not being done in a way which you have not seen before.
Yeah, it reminds me of a Paul Graham quote I really like, which is, think about what the future should look like, then look at what's missing, and then build that piece.
Yeah, and I think the same thing is with AI, right? Like there are a ton of ideas out there where, you know, things that, we've talked a lot about lending, both for consumer space, MSME space, robo advisors and other stuff. But again, the key is not to think about you have to think about the normal stuff that everybody will do, but then how would you do it slightly better, do it in a more consumer friendly way, in a way that actually provides delight to the consumer and gets value added, right? Like, so it has to look good. I'm not sure I'm talking that all apps need to look good, but more importantly, how is it adding value in your daily life, where it just happens, it becomes like habit at the end of the day, right? Like I keep telling everything, try to make your products work, right? Like if I'm doing credit card payments, I'm like almost saying I'm doing cred now, right? And if you're doing UPI payments, you're doing either GPay or phone pay, right? How do you make your products a verb in that sense? And that's the key, in my sense, to go big, right? Not just think small incremental, but think big.
Sweet. So I just saw the first few emojis from our audience. Guys, you're being very stingy with those emojis. We also need the oxytocin dose from them. So thank you. Great responses. And talking about the future and things which are missing. Are there any things which the two of you would like to see come into the account aggregator system? So two questions, right, to each of you. One would be that, have you seen something in the account aggregator that can solve a pain point you have as entrepreneurs in your business for your customers? And secondly, the second part is there some data type which, I'm sure you've hit a bunch of roadblocks and hurdles and found it difficult to do one thing or another. Is there another kind of data which may not currently be included in the spec, which you would like to see come on? And that could be a blue ocean thing. It doesn't have to be financial data.
I think what I see companies that could benefit is that we want to be somehow involved in journeys which help consumers with financial progress, right? And the financial progress can come from figuring out ways that they don't lose money. So we constantly want people, when they are paying less than due amounts, to be careful about. They should be careful about what they are paying their bills, or kind of figuring out a way that can they lose uh, money on deposit that they're keeping with the bank account, right? So we are thinking broadly in those spectrums, that how do we kind of reduce the interest loss. But there are many places that they are kind of not aware about what is happening with their money, right? So can we act as a guardian constantly and help them, give nudges to do good behavior? That's one large use case we see getting solved with this in an evolved format. It's hard to say how it will happen today, but we do see that kind of happening. Number two, in terms of things that I would love to see, I think money stores of value, right? Like, why shouldn't it have my credit card points? Why can't it have my loyalty points for my airlines? And I'm just thinking aloud right now, but the thing is that any store of value in some ways, where I believe is my asset in some ways, should be part of the ecosystem eventually, because if it's done through a single API access, it kind of allows more use cases to be built on top of it. For example, credit card companies would be very happy if people could use their points for redemption in many places. But the fact that these APIs are not currently standardized, it becomes a Herculean task for everybody to tie up with every bank and kind of build on top of that. So I think anything that consumers feel is a store of value could be a good use case to add in the future.
Awesome, makes sense. And Sumit, how about you?
Yeah, no, I'll just postpone to, everything Kunal said, but sort of just take it even further in terms of what you can, right? Like it's not just banking and financial entities, there are a bunch of other financial entities. Think about wallets, right? A lot of for and there was a PFM talk last week, right? PFM companies would love to see uh, payments made not just through your bank account, but also through your wallets like Paytm in that sense, right? There's still a ton of stuff happening even at the wallet sense. Any kind of asset, as Kunal said, would be there. It's, your credit card, not even just assets, but even things like your credit card statements, fixed deposits, mutual fund data in that sense, right? Anything that I have from a financial perspective, ideally should be, I would say, as part of account aggregate. I know a lot is in the roadmap, but I think that's when we will see sort of full data democratization.
And just to sort of touch on that, identity is another important thing, right? Like access to your assets, but also ways to authenticate yourself. And the account aggregator framework is one initiative which aims to pull together the financial sector regulators and get asset data. But there's also the personal data protection bill, which will open up access to non-financial data. It could be your social media data or your Uber data, different kinds of things. So we're clearly heading in that direction, and I think it's an exciting time. I want to come back to rewards points for a second because Kunal brought it up, and both of you have in your careers worked a lot with rewards points. In CRED, it's obviously a large part of CRED's product, even at Freecharge and at Google Pay. So, can you guys talk a little bit about rewards points as a, how do you see it? Is it just like a customer acquisition thing? Is it like a customer retention thing? Does it, when you turn off the tap, does it, especially in an economy like this, do you think, how do you view it?
Um, Human beings are motivated through incentives. Incentives comes in many shapes and forms, and every company has time and again introduced different various formats for doing that behavior. I think a lot of times I like to give this example that a lot of kids love to like going to temple for the prasad first, then the god. So the question is that first, what do you solve for? The concept of God is hard to understand, but you start with the prasad, at least you start going frequently over there. And after the 10, 15 visits, you probably evolve to a bigger concept, right? And I think it has been fundamentally the reason I think Google Pay or CRED or Freecharge, Freecharge was actually built on reward, right? So it was always the core concept of doing that, and it was called Freecharge for a reason. The thing is, when it comes to incentivization, there is a lot of times we all have a stronger view that, oh, the companies are burning money and, oh, there is all of this stuff. But we have to look at the example of Geo. We should not forget that for 18 months they give millions of customers free data. I mean, that is not a scratch card. That is actually free data and GBs of data that was given to them. So I would say that uh, it's only a matter of time where more companies try to do that. But there's a nuance. Just having a reward program does not make it rewarding. A lot of times you have to create good products to build on top of that people like to use.
Just agree with Kunal there. I think the way I look at rewards is rewards help you, it gives you time for people to use your product, right? Not every product you can look at it in like one day and fall in love with it, right? It takes some time to do it. So a form of rewards, again, done judiciously, where you're not like throwing money completely out there, if done right and done with the right kind of excitement, allows you to buy a bit more time for people to fall in love with your product. At the end of the day, your product still should shine through, but your basically the reward gives you that time as a founder, as a product manager to get people used to your product and then fall in love with it, right? It's all about building habit. Once you build habit to your product, then users will generally stay with it even if your rewards are not as attractive as initially.
Yeah, just like how we keep asking for emojis on this platform, it's that feel good factor that you get knowing that you could get some reward or some positive encouragement. So I want to ask a strategy related question. In our previous session, we spoke a lot about the different kinds of data which will become available through the AA platform. And we spoke about how UX will also improve. So customers will be able to share data with greater control. There'll be lots of data that they can share, and the process will be relatively frictionless and cheap. So that means that if I'm going out and acquiring customers as a fintech, and I've largely focused on getting customers first and then monetizing their data later, do you think that strategy is now in peril due to the way that this new infrastructure is going to make access to data much more democratized? Let's say.
I don't think I have a point of view. I don't know. Sumit, you should probably.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? Like I think the way I would sort of say is like, the data gets democratized, but I think there's one of the questions which I'm sort of also seeing by Ankur Javeri, which sort of also is a related question. How would a non-regulated fintech make use of the AA ecosystem where it cannot be an FIU, right? Data democratization is there, but for whom? So I'm going to like combine these two and try to sort of give my thoughts on this. So I think the two parts to it, right? Like I think at the end of the day, data democratization of what, right? The different pieces of data. There's financial data where we are starting with for account aggregators today, and hopefully account aggregator system will go to beyond financial data. At least that's my hope. When that happens, right, data democratization will help you access to it, right? Like, but even after access to it, there have been many financial players globally who have had access to immense amounts of data and have not been able to do anything with it. The
Yeah.
question is, how do you then make use of that data in a way that's useful, right? And in a way that doesn't push the consumer into something, right? Like, can you provide that data to the user to make each of your products better? Rather than building, like you can build new products out of the data, but how do you make your current products build 10x, 100x better using that data? Right? And make it even more an habit. I'll keep going back to that, right? Like in that sense. In terms of trying to answer the non-regulated fintech, like I think over time, once the bill comes to, I would really assume that even this is a way for non-regulated fintechs also by putting the right guardrails have access to AA data. Um, what I've heard from sort of the AA Samadhi team is that it will happen over time, but that's not what they're starting with.
Uh, I just want to add to that point. One is the classic problem that I've seen in India is a concept of solutions trying to find a problem. I suspect that platforms like this will create this concept where you say, hey, let me just kind of build this and I'll find a problem. Very little time will be spent on really knowing the problem and how do you use this platform to solve that problem. That's the first point. The second thing about global platforms and understanding of what you just mentioned, Sumit, the point is we are in a country where I have observed even the affluent customers do not have basic financial literacy. Okay, the top 1% income earners, we at CRED found out that 70% of CRED members believe their credit card's interest rate is 15%. Right? Now we are in a nation where the gap is so wide on this, right? So the question is that our solutions are way more intelligent and probably built for people who have very high awareness of financial literacy. High IQ is not enough. A lot of people have not discussed money in their entire life with anybody in their family, with their friends. It's a massive taboo topic for a lot of people discussing money, right? And this is the only app where nobody will take screenshots and share with each other, right? Nobody's sharing screenshot of what is my credit card bill payment due, what is my bank account balance, and nobody seems to be training each other. So I think the worry I have is that we have probably built more solutions than the consumer's ability to consume a lot of times, and therefore simpler solutions work more. We should not forget that while the UPI and everything has become big, 90% of use cases is still P2P and recharges. Nothing else is being done on these platforms after 7-8 years of existence.
No, fully agree. Just to add to Kunal's point, right? I think it becomes even more important to then take your actual problems and then do it simpler way, right? Like where a problem that happens with most products is they start out very well because they have one solution to provide, right? And one problem that they started with. And then within a year of launch, they have now 10 different solutions, and the homepage or whatever the main page of the app becomes so complex that it's almost impossible to figure out what needs to be done, right? So if you're solving, like, going from one problem to five problems, it becomes even more critical to keep it really, really simple.
Yeah, that hits home very close to home for me because I was the co-founder of a blockchain startup in 2016. If there's ever an embodiment of the phrase "hammer looking for a nail," it's blockchain in 2016. So I can definitely relate to that. We had some great advice from one of our previous masterclass speakers about how to build a successful hackathon project. But I think it's applicable to building products at large, which is start with a problem and go from there. And also, Ankur's question about non-regulated fintechs, the masterclass I just referred to, which was by Akash NS of Jovian.ml, and several masterclasses on the legalities of the AA framework are all available on the Sehmati YouTube channel. This talk is also being recorded and will be posted there. But if you want to check out what other speakers have said, there's a lot of material in the legal sessions. So I encourage you to check those out. There's one question we received, which I'd like to ask you guys, which is, what do you think is the key enabler for young startup fintechs to make a level playing field against large incumbents?
I'll let Sumit answer that question.
Thanks, Kunal. So I think there are different things, right? I think today, a lot of time, if you have a key problem that you're going to solve, you can start a fintech and take components almost like a puzzle. A lot of the puzzle pieces are already made, so you don't have to make every single puzzle piece. You can take a lot. There are like enablers in the system that exist, right? You just and then the key is to focus on the solution and the problem you are solving and build that, right? So you don't need to build everything, right? Like but the problem is, don't build nothing and don't build everything. For finding the right balance between the two is always critical. What is your mode? What are the value you're adding? Focus on that and build those solutions, right? So if you say for like enabler for a young startup fintech, I think like identify problems that need to be solved and build on that, right? Don't try to build problems that are already solved or build like cool stuff and just launch those, right? Can we actually solve problems in that sense? Like, at Epifi, like, while we are a neobank and most people say the two problems that we are out there to solve is demystification for finances for the end user and maximizing savings. And it's just focusing on one or two things and whether we can do that.
So, sorry, Kunal, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say that it's probably a good question to ask, what would the big platforms not do? And for example, we asked this question to ourselves. We realized that nobody will go after the top 1-2%, because fundamentally big platforms don't like to do something that is very niche in nature. So we went after a cohort that is only 20-25 million customers by design, and I think that choice is what we made. And I think that's one way of kind of building on top of that, finding yourself on some ground, and then you can obviously expand your market beyond that. But a lot of times, if you go head on with them, I've never seen people winning a war when they walk into a gunfight with a knife. It's probably best to not go into that fight.
Yeah. Or take a knife or a pillow or any other kind of non-gun item. Sumit, I want to ask you, maybe some of the audience are not familiar with Epifi, but Epifi is a neobank, and I'd like to ask you, about how you see the role of account aggregators in neobanking, which is obviously a very popular theme right now in fintech.
It's depending on what kind of neobank you are, right? A neobank, the word neobank has also been abused quite a lot out there today, right? You could be just doing mutual funds or just doing cards, and you're still a neobank in that sense, right? Like again, so I think if we let's use the abused word definition and go with it, right? So then, depending upon what area of banking functionality you're providing, there's a role in there, right? If you're providing wealth management, there are wealth management use cases. If you're providing robo advisory as a neobank, you have robo advisory use cases. If you're providing, PFM like functionality where you're aggregating accounts for different users and providing financial capabilities, there is sort of use case there. There are neobanks who are planning to focus on lending, right? So they have lending. So I think the way I would say there's not a single neobank use cases. Depending upon what kind of a neobank you are, you're probably combining use cases from two to three different areas. And then the key challenge becomes how do you combine them into provide a more unified solution rather than an individual solution, right? Like if you look at what neobanks have done globally, right, in the consumer space, everyone from a Monzo to a Chime to a Revolut, they've managed to use certain open banking APIs where possible to provide more functionality, right? It could be looking at other banks account and providing an integrated net worth in sort of a wealth management kind of a solution, or providing them lending products like Nubank in that sense, right? Like, so I think it's a question about what focus of your play is, and then using account aggregator for that. And I expect almost all neobanks in India to use the account aggregator solution in the next year or so.
Uh, my view on the whole neobank thing is that uh, uh, historically copying global ideas have not worked very well for India. So while we have borrowed this label from the world, we should understand that a lot of them were stuck with a lot of large banks, and no private banks had kind of become big. India's neo banking opportunity happened when HDFC and ICICI and Kotak banks came about. Honestly, that was the our neobank version of things many years ago. What we are doing today is going after interesting use cases through a lot of these companies. I'm fortunate enough to invest in companies like Epifi, and I'm very fortunate to understand a lot of things from things that there are so many individual gaps that you have to go into, right? You cannot just start with saying that I will build this big bang everything, right? I have a very simple view. If you try to become a Swiss knife before you become a good knife, you're most likely to be kept on the cupboard and never be used. So you should be careful about that.
That's a great Kunalism, I think, like almost like the toothbrush test, right? Like the Swiss knife metaphor for startups.
It's not the same, so don't conflate these things. You'll probably confuse them more. They are different things.
No, different thing, but just similarly evocative metaphors. So there's one question which is seemingly quite popular on the chat, so I'll address that. But in the meantime, just want to let you know, Kunal, that we actually have a poll feature inside AirMeet, so we can ask yes/no questions in case you want to do that at any point. But Jay Developer asks, what do you think are the incentives for big banks to join the AA ecosystem? Maybe I can just have a quick stab at it, and if you guys agree or feel differently, you can say that. So while banks would probably be a little bit hesitant to share data of their customers with competitors, they can only get access to the new customers' data in that nice, clean, digitally signed, low cost format if they also give their data. And seeing that they only have their own customer data to kind of give up, but everybody else's customer data to get in to serve a larger base of customers, and also taking in data from sources like GST, it kind of makes sense. And Sumit, you were, this is very relevant to UPI and how banks were at the time of UPI launch. We'd love to hear your, some stories from that and how banks kind of came onto UPI.
So I think the way I see of the reason large banks would be part of AA, like while each bank themselves has an FIU, right? They are a lender. They want to do that. They also want access to the data, and this is where the rule of reciprocity that account aggregator comes in, right? If I have to get data myself, so if any one of the big banks wants data for their credit card products or for their regular lending products, where the customer is banking with someone else, they also want to provide that data. So I think that's sort of a reason why you will see the existing banks come in. And I think the same thing true was in UPI too, right? Like I think there was a reason, of course, there were other factors involved too, but I think uh, what banks were hoping, IMPS was there for a long period of time, and the ability to provide great solutions was sort of a big reason why you saw first the first 30 banking apps were the only places where UPI was initially going to be, right? So all the banks, for them, was this was going to be a low cost solution, a feature that all banks would provide beyond that. Now, in terms of execution and stuff, you ended up seeing more actual players provide better execution sort of on UPI, which saw them get more success than the banks. But at the end of the day, it's a feature still there in all the banks' apps that you will see.
Makes sense. We have a question which comes about how would you guys define success for Sehmati? Say 4 years down the line, what would you like to see?
I would say unique data request, a billion of them.
Yeah, I think so. I think even UPI, people talk a lot about UPI being a big success story, and it is in many ways a big success story and very popular. But India is 1.3 billion people, and we need to get most of those people using the system. That's the ambition, right? It's not just a solution for the top 150 million or so. So yeah, totally agree with you there, Kunal.
Yeah, I'll just add, like, I would say, like, more than a unique request, like the number of users using it, can we get to 10 to 20% of a population to start with? So 100 million to 200 million unique users who have used the account aggregator framework, or, their fintech used it basically to get the users data and consent for providing a financial service or even non-financial services in the next 4 5 years.
We got like a deluge of questions in the last 2 minutes, so maybe we won't be able to answer all of those. But I'll ask a question about. So somebody's asked an interesting use case, and they've given an idea of loan against shares, and that potentially becoming easier because of access to this data about your assets. And I think, to paraphrase that question, what sort of use? Let me put it another way. Imagine that you had non-competes and you couldn't do what you're doing right now with CRED and Epifi, and you had to kind of start again. And it need not actually be in the account aggregator framework, but what would be some areas which you think, okay, this is some place where developer energy, or at least my entrepreneur energy, can be excited by this use case or this sector?
Sumit, you want to answer that? I don't think I'm really the most apt person to answer that.
So I think, I don't know, are you looking for just from this sector in the capital markets or anything beyond?
I think it could be beyond, like just something that jumps out to me is like insurance, right? So like you see headline numbers about insurance penetration being super low. That some people could say that's one interesting area. So I'm wondering whether you guys have these other sort of pet interest areas which you think will be successes or need more innovation.
So I think also two, right? Insurance definitely is one. The other also is identity, right? Like, identity in India is still broken. Let's not say India, in like most places, right? Like, from everything, in most forms of identity for fintech markets, whether you just talk about KYC or even later, is completely, I would say, while things are getting better, I think there's still a lot of room to do in world of identity that's out there, right? And I think a lot of stuff that's not happened in fintech in general, as I would say, is how do you do things in small sachets, right? Your FMCG companies have gone to small sachets. Fintech is just starting to think about small sachets now, right? There are a ton of innovations across the board where you could do that.
Sweet. So overall, account aggregators, to again summarize a little bit, you guys think there's a lot of potential there, but it should come from a space of, here's a solution and now we need to fit this solution into every problem. It could be a means to kind of engage with the platform, think about how to build platforms rather than just products, and look to find problems first. Start with the problem, become a good knife, and then sort of make your way into other fields. Anything else you guys would like to add as concluding remarks?
Yeah, I'll add one thing to sort of end, right? Like, again, account aggregator is going to enable a ton of different solutions, but don't look at account aggregator in itself, right? Like, look at, again, the problem, and look at other things. Things from India Stack, things, beyond India Stack, things that allow you to take what's out there to actually go and solve real day problems, right? Like, And there are a ton of problems out there that affect people literally on a weekly, monthly basis in that sense, right? And how do you go and take account aggregator and other stuff out there to solve it, right? Like I think you've seen ton of innovations and people trying to attempt even in the last 4 months when we are all stuck at home. This I would expect a ton more new solutions coming out of it, right? Like we've seen ton of innovations happening with consent and health stack too, right? And how do you combine across these different areas? Because sometimes people lives, don't span on one, spans across areas, and you will see ton of these cross area solutions also coming into play very soon.
Uh, my thoughts on this is that every time a new platform emerges, while through creativity you can imagine 15, 20 use cases, it will usually become used 90% of times for one or two use cases, right? Uh, and and uh, and then obviously multiple things evolve around that, and it becomes more nuanced. I believe that uh, at this point of time, uh, I believe that there is a lot of uh, enthusiasm from the teams that have built it, and especially iSpirit. I've been involved with iSpirit in capacity of being a volunteer for a long time. I would. I mean, I think the hackathon would be a great way to create more use cases and thoughts around this. But the reality is that ultimately consumers will understand it in simple ways, right? You may have complex use cases, complex understanding of how what can it do, and I think early trust is going to be everything. One of the things that I would remind people is that when UPI happened for the first time, in our first UPI experience was magical. It did not induce fear. Uh, I think the only thing that can go wrong with a platform like this, which is around sensitive topic like data, is that does it create a moment of excitement or does it create a moment of fear? Because if the early, let's say, million customers who interact with this platform with all these players have uh, an experience that causes fear in them, the it will take we'll have to probably rename this platform and relaunch it with something else, and one does not want to do that. So I think my worry remains is that a lot of players have shown a lot of enthusiasm to come in, but the role of trust, the role of doing a good job, meeting all the regulation, meeting all the guidelines, uh, is going to be on a lot of parties which are participating in early on, and to ensure that the ecosystem takes off. If the mistake of one player for the early loopholes that may exist in the system will cause a huge amount of consumer trust deficit, and one does not want to do that. So I think we'll all have to work together on protecting this initiative, and not leave it for the guys who have built it.
And just as a segue to that, we're lucky to have a lot of energy in the hackathon, and a lot of teams are working on things like secure, consent journeys, preventing consent fraud, building consent journeys for low literacy users, feature phone users, and a lot of people actually a lot of mind share in the problem that you talked about, Kunal, which is how to educate people about their finances. So a lot of PFM apps centered around financial literacy and kind of creating a conversation around one's financial health. I'm excited for those. I hope you guys are as well. And Kunal, you're a judge for the hackathon, so we're excited to see what you think of some of these projects as well. Um, on behalf of everybody watching, thank you very much for being here, both of you, Kunal, Sumit. It's been a great conversation, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did, and presumably the audience did. There we go with the emojis. So I'd just like to say a little bit of housekeeping stuff first. Guys, I'll put a bunch of useful links in the chat. So this chat will persist for some time. You can probably get links to some resources around the hackathon. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. we have another session by Bain talking about neobanking and open banking and the opportunities in there. So please do tune in for that. Next weekend, Saturday, August 1st, is the hackathon presentations begin. Sunday, August 2nd, is the final presentations and closing ceremony. So do tune in. Once again, thank you so much, Kunal. Thank you so much, Sumit.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Steve.